Ambassador Kira Chen stood at the massive observation window of Nexus Station, watching ships from dozens of different worlds dock at the sprawling diplomatic complex. The station was like a small city floating in space, with towers and rings that stretched for kilometers in every direction. Each section belonged to a different species, and each species had its own way of doing things. Kira touched the small pendant at her throat without thinking about it. It was a simple thing, just a piece of metal shaped like an old Earth symbol. Most people would think it was just jewelry, but it meant much more than that. She had worn it every day for the past 5 years, ever since she became humanity's main representative to the Galactic Council. Today was important. The trade negotiations with the Vorthak Collective had been going on for 3 months, and they were finally close to an agreement. The Vorthak controlled shipping routes through 4 major star systems, and humanity needed access to those routes if they wanted to expand beyond their current territory. The problem was that the Vorthak did not think much of humans. They saw Earth as a young world full of primitive people who had only recently learned to travel between stars. To them, humans were barely worth talking to, let alone making important deals with. Kira walked through the station's main corridor toward the meeting room. Other diplomats nodded to her as she passed. Some were friendly, others were not, but all of them respected her. She had earned that respect over years of careful work and successful negotiations. The meeting room was huge, with a table that could seat representatives from 50 different species. Today only a dozen were present, but the Vorthak delegation took up a lot of space. They were tall, gray-skinned beings with long limbs and large heads. Their eyes were completely black, and they rarely showed any emotion on their faces. Trade Minister Zexthal was the leader of their delegation. He was older than most Vorthak, and his skin had a darker shade that showed his high rank. He had been negotiating deals across the galaxy for longer than Kira had been alive, and he made sure everyone knew it. Ambassador Chen, Zexthal said as she entered the room. His voice was deep and had a strange echo to it. We were just discussing the final details of the shipping agreement. Good, Kira replied, taking her seat across from him. I hope we can reach an understanding today. The next 2 hours were filled with talk about trade routes, shipping costs, and security arrangements. Everything seemed to be going well until they took a break. That was when Zexthal decided to share his thoughts about human culture. You know, he said, leaning back in his chair, I have been studying your species for this negotiation. Your history is quite entertaining. Oh? Kira asked, not sure where this was going. Yes. All these stories you tell about your past. Gods who could move mountains with their hands, mortals who refused to die no matter how many times they were killed, warriors who could defeat entire armies by themselves. Zexthal made a sound that might have been laughter. Such wonderful fantasies. Other delegates from different species started to pay attention. Some looked uncomfortable, but others seemed interested in what the Vorthak minister was saying. They are just stories, Kira said carefully. Every species has legends and myths. True, Zexthal agreed. But most species understand that these are just stories. Your people seem to actually believe some of them. You talk about humans who could survive anything, who could adapt to any world, who never gave up no matter how impossible things became. He stood up and walked around the table, his long arms moving as he talked. The truth is much simpler. Your species clings to these laughable fantasies because you cannot accept your own limitations. You are a young race from a small world, and you want to believe you are special. Kira felt her hand move to her pendant without thinking about it. The metal was warm against her fingers. Around the room, she could see other delegates watching the exchange. Some looked embarrassed for her, others seemed to agree with Zexthal. Our legends reflect our values, she said quietly. They teach us about courage, sacrifice, and determination. Values. Zexthal repeated, his black eyes focusing on her pendant. What is that primitive trinket you keep touching? Another symbol of your imaginary heroes. The room became very quiet. Kira could feel everyone watching her, waiting to see how she would respond. She knew that this moment was about more than just trade agreements. It was about how other species saw humanity, and whether they would ever take humans seriously. It is not primitive, she said, her voice staying calm, even though she felt anger building inside her. And our legends are not fake. Zexthal's laughter echoed through the room. It was a cold sound that made several other delegates take a step back. Prove it then, he said, still laughing. Show us one of your miraculous legends. Make one of your impossible stories come true. The challenge hung in the air like a physical thing. Everyone in the room understood what had just happened. In galactic diplomacy, a formal challenge could not be ignored without losing all credibility. If Kira backed down now, it would not just hurt her personally, it would damage humanity's reputation across the entire galaxy. Kira stood up slowly, her hand still on her pendant. She looked around the room at all the watching faces, then back at Zexthal. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. "Want me to prove one?" she asked. The question was simple, but everyone in the room knew it meant much more than that. It was an acceptance of the challenge, a commitment to do something that would either prove humanity's worth or destroy their standing in galactic politics forever. Zexthal's laughter stopped. For the first time since she had known him, he looked uncertain. But he had made the challenge in front of witnesses from dozens of species. He could not take it back now. "Yes," he said finally. "I would very much like to see you prove one of your impossible legends." Kira nodded once. "Then we will need to leave the station. What I need to show you cannot be demonstrated here." "Where?" asked Zexthal. Kira smiled for the first time since the conversation had started. It was not a happy smile. "Kepler 442b. I believe your people have been trying to establish a colony there for several years without success." The room went completely silent. Everyone knew about Kepler 442b. It was a death world with crushing gravity, toxic air, and predators that could kill even well-armed exploration teams. The Vorthak had lost 3 separate colonization attempts there. "That world is impossible to survive on," Zexthal said. "For your people, yes," Kira agreed. "But our legends say that humans can survive anything, can adapt to any environment, and never give up no matter how impossible things become." "You wanted proof. That is where I will give it to you." She looked around the room one more time, meeting the eyes of every delegate present. "The legend I will prove is the most important one humanity has. It is the story of what we become when everything else fails." With that, she walked out of the room, leaving behind a station full of diplomats who suddenly realized they might have underestimated Earth's representatives. The challenge had been made and accepted. Now all that remained was to see if humanity's legends were really just stories, or if they were something much more dangerous. The pendant at Kira's throat pulsed once with a faint blue light that nobody else could see. Deep inside the metal, ancient technology began to wake up, preparing for what was to come. The news of the challenge spread through Nexus Station faster than light could travel through hyperspace. By the next morning, representatives from over 30 species had requested permission to witness the test. Nobody wanted to miss what could either be the most embarrassing failure in diplomatic history or something that would change how they thought about humanity forever. Kira spent the night preparing for the journey. She sent encrypted messages back to Earth, requesting authorization for what she was about to do. The response came from the highest levels of human government. She had permission to use any means necessary to defend humanity's reputation. They understood what was at stake. Her aide, Marcus Webb, found her in her quarters at dawn. He was a young man from Mars Colony, smart and dedicated, but he had never seen anything like what was about to happen. "Ambassador," he said, "I have the ship manifest. Zexthal is bringing a full scientific team, plus security personnel and recording equipment. They want to document everything." "Good," Kira replied, checking her equipment one more time. "Let them record it all. The more witnesses we have, the better." Marcus hesitated. "Ma'am, I have to ask, what exactly are you planning to do on Kepler 442b? I have read all the reports about that world. It has killed everything the Vorthak have sent there." Kira turned to face him, her hand moving to her pendant. "Marcus, what do you know about the Prometheus project?" "Never heard of it," he said immediately. "Most people have not. It was classified at the highest levels and shut down 15 years ago. The goal was to create humans who could survive in any environment, adapt to any threat, and overcome impossible odds." She paused, watching his face. "The project was based on humanity's oldest legends and myths." Marcus stared at her. "You mean they actually tried to make super soldiers based on stories?" "Not super soldiers," Kira corrected. "Something else. Something that would only activate when humanity faced its greatest challenges. The program worked, but the results scared even the people who created it. They decided the technology was too dangerous and locked it away." "But you were part of it," Marcus said. "It was not a question." I was one of the last test subjects before they shut it down. For 15 years, I have been a normal human being with some unusual genetic modifications that never activated. Today, that changes. The ship journey to Kepler 442b took 3 days. During that time, Kira explained more of her background to Marcus while the Vorthak science team prepared their equipment. The planet they were traveling to was a nightmare world that existed at the very edge of what could support life. Kepler 442b had gravity 3 times stronger than Earth normal. The atmosphere was full of chemicals that would burn human skin and destroy most equipment within hours. The temperature swung from freezing cold to burning hot depending on the time of day. Worst of all, the planet was home to predators that had evolved in these harsh conditions, making them incredibly tough and aggressive. "Your people have tried to colonize this world 3 times, Kira said to Zexthul during one of their meals aboard the ship. Each time the expeditions lasted less than a week before they had to evacuate. "The world is simply impossible," Zexthul replied. "No organic life can survive there for extended periods. We have concluded that it can only be colonized using fully automated systems. Yet life already exists there," Kira pointed out. "The predators, the plant life, the entire ecosystem. They have found a way to not just survive, but thrive. They evolved there over millions of years," said Dr. Vexlan, one of the Vorthak scientists. "They are specifically adapted to those conditions. No species from another world could possibly match that level of adaptation quickly enough to matter." Kira smiled. "We will see." On the second day of the journey, Marcus found Kira in the ship's small gym, exercising harder than he had ever seen anyone exercise before. She was lifting weights that should have been impossible for someone her size, and she did not seem to be getting tired. "Is it starting already?" he asked. "The modifications are responding to stress," she explained, not stopping her workout. "My body knows we are heading into danger and it is beginning to prepare. By the time we reach Kepler 442b, I will be ready." "Ready for what exactly?" Kira set down the weights and looked at him seriously. "Ready to become the legend they think is impossible." When they arrived at Kepler 442b, the planet looked like a vision of hell from space. The surface was covered in dark storms, and the few clear areas showed a landscape of jagged rocks and twisted plant life. The Vorthak ship stayed in orbit while smaller shuttles prepared to take the expedition down to the surface. "We will establish a base camp in the same location as our previous expeditions," Zexthul announced. "Our equipment is designed to last 72 hours in the planetary environment. That should be more than enough time to observe the failure of your demonstration." 72 hours, Kira repeated. "Interesting. Our legends speak of heroes who fought for days without rest, who survived in places that would kill anyone else, and who never gave up even when death seemed certain. 72 hours should be plenty of time." The shuttle ride down to the surface was rough. The planet's atmosphere fought against their ship every meter of the way, and by the time they landed, several of the Vorthak scientists looked sick from the turbulence. As soon as the shuttle doors opened, Kira understood why this world had defeated every previous expedition. The gravity hit her like a physical blow, making her feel like she weighed 3 times normal. The air itself seemed to burn as it touched her skin, and the sound of predators howling in the distance made it clear that they were not alone. The Vorthak team immediately began setting up their protective equipment: force fields, atmospheric processors, and heavy weapons to defend against the native predators. Within an hour, they had created a small safe zone that could keep them alive for the next 3 days. Kira stood outside their protective perimeter, feeling the full weight of the planet pressing down on her. Her pendant was warm against her throat, and she could feel something stirring deep in her cells. The genetic modifications that had been sleeping for 15 years were finally beginning to wake up. "Well," Zexthul called from inside the safe zone, "when does your demonstration begin?" Kira looked back at him and smiled. For the first time since they had landed, her smile was completely confident. "It already has." As if responding to her words, something roared in the distance. It was a sound like nothing that existed on any civilized world. Pure hunger and aggression made into noise. The Vorthak weapon systems automatically turned toward the sound, searching for targets. "That would be our first test," Kira said, walking toward the sound instead of away from it. "Let me show you what humans become when everything else fails." Behind her, the Vorthak scientist stared in shock as she disappeared into the hostile landscape without any protective equipment at all. Their instruments immediately began tracking her, waiting to record the moment when the planet killed her. They would be waiting for a very long time. The first thing Kira noticed was how her breathing changed. The burning sensation in her lungs lasted for about 10 minutes after leaving the Vorthak safe zone, and then it simply stopped. Her body was adapting to the toxic atmosphere faster than should have been possible. The second thing she noticed was the gravity. What had felt like crushing weight when she first stepped off the shuttle was becoming manageable. Her bones were getting denser, her muscles were growing stronger, and her balance was adjusting to the new conditions. She could feel the changes happening inside her body, and it was both terrifying and amazing. Behind her, she could hear the Vorthak scientists talking excitedly into their communication devices. Their instruments were recording everything: her heartbeat, her brain activity, her cellular changes. They were getting data that their science said should be impossible. Subject is showing rapid physiological adaptation, Dr. Vexelan was saying. Bone density increasing by measurable amounts every hour. Muscle fiber multiplication occurring at unprecedented rates. This should not be possible without technological assistance. Kira could hear them clearly even though they were over a kilometer away. Her hearing was getting better along with everything else. She could smell the different types of vegetation around her, feel the vibrations in the ground from approaching predators, and see details in the landscape that had been invisible before. The pendant at her throat was no longer just warm. It was actively hot, pumping energy into her system and unlocking genetic sequences that had been dormant for years. She finally understood what the Prometheus Project scientists had really created. They had not made super soldiers. They had made humans who could become whatever they needed to be to survive. The first predator found her 3 hours after landing. It was the size of an earth elephant, but built like a hunting cat. Its hide was covered in thick scales that could probably stop bullets, and its claws were as long as swords. 6 legs gave it stability on the rough terrain, and its mouth was full of teeth designed for tearing apart anything that moved. The creature saw her from 50 meters away and immediately charged. On any normal world, any normal human would have been dead in seconds. But Kira was no longer a normal human. She moved faster than she had ever moved in her life, diving to one side as the predator thundered past her. Her reflexes were working at superhuman speed, and her mind was processing information faster than seemed possible. She could see exactly how the creature moved, predict where it would attack next, and plan her response before it even started turning around. The predator spun with surprising speed for something so large and charged again. This time Kira did not dodge. Instead, she grabbed a piece of the planet's rock-hard vegetation and swung it like a club, hitting the creature across its massive skull. The impact should have broken her arms. Instead, it stunned the predator and sent it stumbling backward. Kira could feel the strength in her muscles far beyond what any human should possess. She was becoming something that could match this world's deadliest inhabitants. Back at the base camp, the Vorthak team watched their instruments in amazement and growing fear. Her strength readings are off the charts, one scientist reported. She just struck something with enough force to stop a charging vehicle. Impossible, Zexthal muttered, but his voice was no longer confident. No organic being can increase their capabilities so rapidly. The human is not following any known biological patterns, Dr. Vexlan added. It is as if her genetic code is rewriting itself in real time, adapting to every challenge the planet presents. Marcus stood beside them, watching the displays that tracked Kira's progress. He was proud and terrified at the same time. You wanted to see one of our legends proven, he said quietly. This is what humans become when we are pushed beyond all limits. The predator recovered from Kira's attack and circled her more carefully this time. It was learning that she was not easy prey, but it was not giving up. These creatures had evolved to be perfect killers, and they did not know how to retreat. Kira waited, feeling her body continue to change. Her skin was becoming tougher, more resistant to the planet's harsh environment. Her muscles were growing denser and stronger. Most importantly, her mind was expanding, processing information and making connections at speeds that let her understand this alien ecosystem almost instinctively. When the predator attacked again, she was ready. She ducked under its claws, grabbed one of its massive legs, and used its own momentum to throw it to the ground. The creature weighed over 2 tons, but her enhanced strength made it feel manageable. The predator hit the ground hard and did not get up. It was not dead, just stunned and confused. For the first time in its life, it had met something that was stronger and faster than it was. Kira stood over the fallen creature and felt something surprising. Sympathy. This animal was just doing what evolution had taught it to do. It was trying to survive in a harsh world just like she was. The difference was that her evolution was happening in hours instead of millions of years. She backed away from the predator and continued deeper into the hostile landscape. Behind her, the creature eventually got up and limped away, deciding that there were easier targets elsewhere. Over the next several hours, Kira encountered 4 more predators. Each one was different. Some were fast, others were armored, a few were poisonous. But each time her body adapted to meet the challenge. Her reactions got quicker, her strength increased, and her understanding of the planet's dangers became more complete. By the end of the first day, she was no longer just surviving on Kepler 442b. She was beginning to master it. The Vorthak scientists worked through the night, analyzing the data they were collecting. Nothing in their experience had prepared them for what they were seeing. Kira's cellular structure was changing so rapidly that their instruments could barely keep up. She is becoming something we have never seen before, Dr. Vexlan reported to Zexthul. Not just adapted to this environment, but superior to it. If these readings are correct, she could not only survive on this world indefinitely, she could thrive here. Zexthul stared at the displays showing Kira's location. She had traveled over 20 kilometers from their base camp, through terrain that had killed dozens of Vorthak explorers. This is not possible, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Minister, one of the younger scientists, said carefully, perhaps we should consider the possibility that human legends are not just stories. Perhaps they are instructions. The idea hung in the air like a dangerous thought. If humans could really become what their legends described, then everything the Vorthak thought they knew about the species was wrong. Humanity might not be a young, primitive race after all. They might be something much more threatening. On the planet's surface, Kira found a cliff that overlooked the Vorthak base camp. She could see their lights in the distance, tiny sparks in the hostile darkness. She felt sorry for them, huddled in their protective barriers while the real world raged around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The planet had predators that were even more dangerous than the ones she had faced today. There were environmental hazards that could kill even her enhanced body if she was not careful. And somewhere deep in the planet's wilderness, there were rumors of creatures so deadly that even the other predators avoided them. But tonight, for the first time since landing on Kepler 442b, Kira felt truly alive. Her body was becoming something that could survive anything. Her mind was working faster than ever before, and she was finally understanding what humanity's greatest legend really meant. It was not about being stronger than everything else. It was about becoming whatever you needed to be when the people you cared about were counting on you. Tomorrow she would need to be even more than that. The pendant at her throat pulsed with gentle warmth, and deep inside her cells, the genetic modifications prepared for the next phase of her transformation. Day 2 on Kepler 442b began with an earthquake. Kira felt it coming long before the Vorthak instruments detected it. Her enhanced senses could pick up the deep vibrations in the planet's crust, the subtle changes in air pressure, and the way the local wildlife began moving toward higher ground. She was 20 kilometers from the base camp when the ground started shaking. The earthquake was not just powerful, it was catastrophic. Massive cracks opened in the planet's surface, swallowing entire forests of the twisted vegetation that grew in the toxic soil. Avalanches of rock crashed down from the surrounding mountains, and the air filled with clouds of poisonous dust that would have killed any normal human in minutes. Kira stood in the middle of it all, perfectly balanced despite the violent shaking beneath her feet. Her body had adapted so completely to the planet's conditions that even this disaster felt manageable. She watched the destruction around her and began running back toward the Vorthak base camp. She arrived to find chaos. The earthquake had damaged their protective barriers, and several pieces of their equipment were sparking and failing. Worse, the ground beneath their camp had cracked open, revealing a network of caves that stretched deep into the planet's interior. "Ambassador," Marcus called out when he saw her approaching. "The camp's compromised. We need to evacuate to the shuttle." Kira looked at the damaged equipment and the growing cracks in the ground. "Where is Zexthul?" "He and 3 of his scientists went down into the caves to check for damage to the geological sensors," Marcus replied. That was 2 hours ago. We lost contact with them 30 minutes after they went in. Dr. Vexlon approached them, his gray skin even paler than usual. Ambassador, those caves are filled with the planet's most dangerous predators. Nothing that goes down there comes back out. We must assume they are lost. Kira looked at the dark opening in the ground. Her enhanced hearing could pick up sounds from deep underground. The movement of large creatures, the echo of distant roars, and something that might have been Vorthak voices calling for help. No, she said simply. We do not leave anyone behind. You cannot go down there, Dr. Vexlan protested. Even with your modifications, those caves contain predators that have never seen sunlight. They are evolved to hunt in complete darkness, and they are larger and more aggressive than anything on the surface. Kira turned to Marcus. Get everyone back to the shuttle. If I am not back in 6 hours, leave without me. Ambassador, I cannot... That is an order, Kira said, her voice carrying an authority that made even the Vorthak scientists step back. If humanity's reputation is going to be saved, someone needs to survive to tell the story. She dropped into the cave opening before anyone could argue further. The darkness was absolute, but Kira found that her enhanced vision could adapt to it. What had started as complete blackness gradually became gray shapes, then recognizable forms. The caves were enormous, with passages that stretched for kilometers in every direction. The walls were covered in a substance that glowed faintly, providing just enough light for her to navigate. The air was even more toxic than on the surface, filled with chemicals that would have dissolved her lungs within minutes when she first arrived on the planet. Now her modified respiratory system processed it without difficulty. She could hear the Vorthak voices more clearly now. They were alive but trapped somewhere deep in the cave system. Between her and them, she could sense the movement of the predators Dr. Vexlon had warned her about. The first one found her in a passage that was barely wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. It was like nothing she had seen on the surface. A creature that was mostly mouth and claws, evolved to hunt in the narrow confines of the underground tunnels. It moved without making any sound, relying on senses that had nothing to do with sight or hearing. Kira fought it in the cramped space, her enhanced reflexes allowing her to dodge its attacks while striking back with precision that would have been impossible for any normal human. When it was over, she realized that her body had adapted again. Her muscles were now optimized for fighting in confined spaces, and her senses had developed new capabilities that let her track multiple threats simultaneously. She continued deeper into the caves, fighting her way through predators that represented millions of years of evolutionary perfection. Each encounter pushed her further beyond human limitations, and each victory proved that humanity's legends were more than just stories. Finally, she found them. Zexthul and his 3 scientists were trapped in a small chamber, surrounded by 5 of the largest predators she had seen yet. The creatures were waiting patiently, knowing their prey had nowhere to run. Ambassador? Zexthul's voice was weak with exhaustion and fear. How did you... This is impossible. Nothing survives in these depths. Nothing except humans when we have to, Kira replied. The 5 predators turned toward her, recognizing a new threat. They were each the size of the creatures she had fought on the surface, but these had been bred by the darkness to be perfect killers. Their hide was thicker, their claws sharper, and their movements more coordinated. Kira stood between them and the trapped Vorthak scientists and made a choice that terrified even her. She reached for her pendant and activated the final sequence of genetic modifications. The pain was incredible. Every cell in her body was rewriting itself simultaneously, pushing her beyond anything the Prometheus Project scientists had ever intended. Her strength multiplied again, her speed increased to levels that defied physics, and her mind expanded to process information faster than any computer. But the most important change was not physical. Deep in her consciousness, she felt the awakening of something that made her completely, utterly human, the absolute determination to protect others, no matter what the cost to herself. The fight that followed was unlike anything that had ever happened on Kepler 442b. Kira moved through the 5 predators like a force of nature, her enhanced abilities allowing her to anticipate their attacks, counter their strategies, and strike with precision that ended each threat quickly and efficiently. When it was over, she stood in the middle of the chamber, breathing heavily but victorious. The Vorthak scientists stared at her in complete silence, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Can you walk? She asked Zexthul. Yes. he replied, still staring at her in shock. Then let us go home. The journey back to the surface took 3 hours. Kira led them through passages that were filled with predators, toxic gases, and unstable rock formations. Every obstacle that would have killed a normal rescue team was overcome through abilities that pushed the boundaries of what organic life could achieve. When they finally emerged from the caves, the remaining Vorthak team was preparing to leave. They had assumed everyone underground was lost. The sight of their minister and 3 scientists walking out of the darkness behind a human who had just accomplished the impossible left them speechless. How? Dr. Vexland finally asked. How did you survive what killed everything else we have ever sent down there? Kira looked at him with eyes that now held depths of experience no human had ever possessed before. Because when our people need us, we become whatever we have to become. That is not a legend. That is not a story. That is what makes us human. She walked toward the shuttle, her body already beginning the process of adapting back to normal human parameters. The extreme modifications were burning out her cellular structure, just as the Prometheus Project scientists had predicted. She had perhaps days left to live, but she had proven humanity's greatest legend was real. Behind her, Zexthal stood in the toxic air of Kepler 4b and finally understood what Earth's representatives had been trying to tell them all along. Humanity's legends were not fantasies or primitive stories. They were blueprints for what humans became when everything else failed. And that was the most terrifying truth any species could learn about their neighbors in the galaxy. The shuttle ride back to Nexus Station was the quietest journey any of them had ever experienced. The Vorthak scientists sat in stunned silence, occasionally looking at their instruments to confirm that what they had recorded was real. The data showed impossible things: cellular regeneration at rates that defied biology, strength measurements that exceeded their equipment's ability to measure, and adaptation speeds that happened faster than evolution should allow. Kira sat by herself near the back of the shuttle, feeling her body slowly returning to something closer to normal human parameters. The extreme modifications were designed to be temporary, burning bright and fast when humanity faced its greatest challenges. Now that the immediate danger was over, they were shutting down one by one. But the process was not gentle. Each system that deactivated sent waves of pain through her body. Her enhanced strength was fading, leaving her muscles feeling weak and shaky. Her improved senses were dimming back to normal levels, making the world seem gray and muted. Most importantly, her cellular structure was beginning to break down from the stress of the rapid changes. Marcus sat down beside her. "How long?" he asked quietly. "The Prometheus Project files estimated 3 to 6 months after full activation," Kira replied. "The modifications burned too hot to sustain permanently. They were designed for short-term survival in impossible situations, not for long-term use." "Was it worth it?" Kira looked toward the front of the shuttle, where Zexthal sat staring out at the stars. "Ask me that question in a few hours when we see how the galaxy responds to what happened." When they docked at Nexus Station, word of the events on Kepler 442b had already spread through unofficial channels. Diplomatic staff from dozens of species were waiting in the docking bay, all eager to hear first-hand accounts of what had occurred. The formal debriefing took place in the same meeting room where the challenge had been issued 3 days earlier. This time, however, the atmosphere was completely different. The casual dismissal and mockery that had characterized the previous meeting was gone, replaced by a wary respect that bordered on fear. Zexthal stood before the assembled delegates and delivered his report in a voice that shook with emotion. "I have witnessed something that challenges everything we thought we knew about organic limitations. Ambassador Chen demonstrated capabilities that our science says should be impossible, surviving and thriving in conditions that have defeated our most advanced technology." He paused, looking directly at Kira. "I formally apologize for my earlier statements about human legends. They are not fantasies or primitive stories. They are something else entirely." "What do you mean?" asked the delegate from the Centauri Republic. "I mean that human legends appear to be instructions," Zexthal replied. "Genetic templates for what their species can become when faced with impossible challenges. What we witnessed was not technology or advanced equipment. It was evolution accelerated to timescales measured in hours instead of millennia." The room erupted in conversation as representatives from different species tried to process the implications. If humans could really adapt to any environment, overcome any obstacle, and survive any threat, then the entire balance of galactic politics would need to be reconsidered. Ambassador Thalvin from the Rigel Consortium stood up. Are you saying that all humans possess these capabilities? Unknown, Zextal admitted. But the potential appears to exist within their genetic structure. Ambassador Chen activated abilities that had been dormant for years, using technology that was somehow integrated into her biology. Dr. Vexelan added his scientific perspective. The modifications we observed were not random adaptations. They were purposeful, intelligent changes that specifically addressed each challenge the planet presented. This suggests a level of genetic engineering that is far beyond what we believed human science had achieved. Kira stood up slowly, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. The technology exists, but it comes at a price. What you witnessed on Kepler 442b was a human being pushed beyond all biological limits. That level of enhancement cannot be sustained without destroying the person who uses it. You are dying, said Ambassador Jextar from the Vegan Trade Alliance. It was not a question. Yes, Kira replied simply. The modifications that allowed me to survive on that world are burning out my cellular structure. I have perhaps months left to live. The room fell silent as the delegates absorbed this information. The implications were staggering. Humans possess the ability to transcend their biological limitations, but only at the ultimate cost. Why? Asked Ambassador Thalvin. Why would your species develop technology that requires such a sacrifice? Kira smiled sadly. Because sometimes protecting others is more important than protecting yourself. That is the heart of every human legend. The idea that we will become whatever we need to become, pay whatever price we need to pay, to ensure that the people we care about survive. She looked around the room at all the watching faces. You wanted proof that our legends are real. The legend I proved was not about impossible strength or miraculous abilities. It was about the most human trait of all, the willingness to sacrifice everything for others. Over the following weeks, the story of what happened on Kepler 442b spread throughout the galaxy. Human diplomatic status changed overnight from barely tolerated newcomers to a species that commanded genuine respect and, in some cases, fear. The trade negotiations with the Vorthak Collective were completed within days, with terms far more favorable to humanity than anyone had expected. Other species began approaching Earth's representatives with offers of cooperation, technology sharing, and mutual defense agreements. But for Kira, the political victories were less important than the personal cost. She spent her remaining time writing detailed reports about the Prometheus project, ensuring that future generations would understand both the potential and the price of humanity's genetic legacy. 3 months after the events on Kepler 442b, she transmitted her final message to Earth. It contained the complete genetic template for the modifications, along with strict instructions about when and how they should be used. To those who come after me, she recorded, remember that our legends are not just stories. They are promises we make to each other, that no human will ever face impossible odds alone, that we will always find a way to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and that we will gladly pay any price to ensure humanity's survival. She paused, touching the pendant at her throat one last time. The technology exists to make any human into something beyond normal biological limits. Use it wisely. Use it only when everything else has failed. And remember that the greatest legends are not about the power we gain, but about what we are willing to give up for others. The message ended with her genetic signature and a final notation. Legend proven. Price paid. Humanity's future secured. When Zexathul heard about her death, he requested permission to speak at her memorial service. Standing before representatives from hundreds of worlds, he delivered a eulogy that became one of the most important speeches in galactic diplomatic history. Ambassador Chen taught us that humanity's greatest strength is not their technology, their weapons, or their numbers, he said. It is their willingness to transcend their own limitations when others need them to. Today we do not mourn just the loss of a remarkable individual. We mourn the loss of someone who showed us what it truly means to be human. The memorial service was attended by more species than had ever gathered for a single event in galactic history. It marked the beginning of a new era in which humanity was recognized not as a young, primitive species, but as the inheritors of legends that were far more dangerous and beautiful than anyone had imagined. In the years that followed, other humans would face their own impossible challenges. When they did, they would remember Kira's sacrifice and the truth she had proven. that humanity's legends were not just stories, but blueprints for what they could become when everything else failed. And in the depths of space, on worlds where survival seemed impossible, humans would continue to prove that their greatest legends were the most terrifying truths in the galaxy.